Hi, and welcome to this web tutorial of Audacity 2.2.2. Let's get started. So, first, you're going to need to download the application. To do that, you're going to want to visit audacityteam.org, and you can either click this button here or come to their download menu, and whether you're working on a Windows, Mac, Linux, etc., you can follow that link. I'm working on a Windows here, so I'll download that or click on that. Then I'd want to click on this file right here, and there's some plugins, optional plugins down below as well. They also have a great forum and community surrounding their software. So let's get out of this real quick. Audacity is a great program because it's open source, it's free, and it's available on Mac, Windows, and Linux. To get started, we're going to go ahead and open up Audacity. So I'm going to locate that program right here and double click. And this is what we should see each time we open up. We get this little intro help window. I'm going to go ahead and click that I don't want to see this again, but it's always available to us. Click OK. And so we have an empty project right here. By default, when you open up Audacity, it's going to set up a new project, a new blank project for you. So the first thing we want to do is start importing things into the project. So I can do that a few ways. I can come up to File and say Import Audio, and I can go and locate my audio that way. I can also say File Open and go and locate audio that way. The only difference is File Open is going to open that file by itself, and Import is going to import that clip into your project. I'm going to go ahead and import a couple other clips here. Let's File Import, and I need to go locate where these files are. And so when you import audio, usually you're going to get this option if you're dealing with an uncompressed format. So the file I just tried to import is a WAV file, an uncompressed file. And we get three options here: make a copy of the file before editing, read the files directly from the original, or don't warn again and always use my choice above. Or that is an extra option at the end. So I'm going to click on, or leave it on the default of make a copy. This is going to leave the original file in its original location and make a new copy of the file, and we're going to make changes to that file. If you're really pressed for time, you can read the files directly from the source location, but you will be making edits directly to that file. So my recommendation is to always just leave this on the default. Since I want to do this every time, I'm going to go ahead and say, don't warn me again. We can always get back to that menu later. Great, so now we have two files open. We can go ahead and start navigating this menu here. So up top, the most obvious buttons, we have a play button, pause button, stop, and we have take me to the beginning of the clip and the end of the clip. We also have a record button here, and we're going to cover recording here in just a minute. So before we get too involved with editing, I want to take a step back and look at recording. So I'm going to come up and choose File New and start a new project. And I'm going to set that project. So I'm going to say Save Project As. And you notice it's giving me a warning here that saving my project is not the same as exporting it, that I will only be able to open it through Audacity, and that is fine. That's what I want. I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to come to my desktop, and I'm going to make a new folder for so I'm going to make a new folder and go into that and name my file Save. So I can come back out to my desktop, and in Audacity tutorial now I have this Audacity file. So if I double click this, this is a way I can save my file and come back to it and keep editing it, and I don't have to export every time. So I'm going to come in, and we need to I want to start recording something. So I have this record button here, and you notice if I click record, it's recording, but we need to take a step back because it doesn't just happen like that. So we're gonna come back and I'm gonna select this and use my backspace or delete and get rid of that. You notice right here we have some input and output options. This is also available. I'm on a Windows, so I'm going to go to Edit, Preferences. Mac would be the Audacity logo and then Preferences. So right here under Devices, these are the same options I have up here, but I'm going to use this menu for now. For my playback, I have options. I'm choosing to play it back through speakers, my headphones. And for recording, I have my input for the microphone that I'm using. So just know if you're trying to record, you're going to need to connect your microphone to your computer. You can either do that using a traditional microphone and a digital to analog converter. You can also use what I'm using, which is a USB microphone. But you're going to need to come into Preferences or right here and set your output where you want that sound to go, preview, and your input. So you need to select your microphone here. You may also need to come into your computer settings and select your output and input devices here as well. This can get a little tricky, but it's really just where things are headed. So if you just keep an eye on this, you should be good to go. So I set up my microphone, and now if we click record, hello, testing. Go ahead and click stop. Okay, I'm going to play this back. Hello, testing. Go ahead and click. All right, so you see we recorded a basic track here. So this is a really easy way we can start recording our own voices. You can also plug in instruments and record this way. Let's get back to our podcast. Okay, so I have two things here. I'm going to go ahead and play this one by soloing it. I could have also muted this track right here. So I can mute tracks and I can solo them. Solo is the opposite. It's going to only play the track that I selected. So I'm going to come up here and preview what I have. Hi, and welcome to the 27th episode of Goucher Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Baker. This week, we have topics ranging from creative coding, 3D animation, video editing, and audio recording. Stay tuned. Cut. All right. First thing you notice, I'm using this play button here and this stop button here, but a control you should get used to is using the space bar. So I'm going to go ahead and click and just use my space bar to play and pause. So we have a little intro to a podcast recording that I made. I'm going to come up and solo this other track and see what we have here. All right, so that is a background track that I downloaded for this video for this podcast. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to focus on this track right here. The default tool we have here is the selection tool. So using this, I can select where I want my playhead and then hit my space bar. Recording, and it's going to play there. I can also click and drag to select certain parts of clips. So this is our main tool. So if you notice at the beginning, I have that cough, and at the end I have cut. Yeah, I say cut there. So the first thing that's really obvious is I want to trim these unwanted ends off. I have this cough up front and I have cut at the end. And so there's a couple ways we can do this. First of all, I want to take my selection tool and I'm going to drop it right here before I start speaking. Hi, and welcome. Okay, so that's good. And I'm going to zoom in. So I can use this plus and minus button up here to zoom in, and that's going to zoom in wherever my playhead is. If you hover over, you notice I can also use Control 1 and Control 3. So Control 1 to zoom in and Control 3 to zoom out. And this can be pretty handy if you need to make very specific cuts. So I'm going to come in here and come right there. And then now I'm going to zoom back out a little bit. And so I'm going to select here to here. And so I can do a few things now. I can just use my backspace button or delete key and just get rid of that whole clip. And now when it starts, hi, and it's going to start right at the beginning. So that to me is the easiest. I'm going to use Control Z. On Mac would be Command Z. I'm going to come back, and with that still selected, come up to Edit. And in Edit, I can say Remove Special or Clip Boundaries. And these are a few ways I can split this clip up. So first of all, I'm going to say Split Cut. And that's just going to remove it without bumping this clip over to the left. I'm going to use Control Z again, come back up to Edit, Remove Special. I'm going to say Split Delete. Same thing. So I'm going to come back up and clip boundaries and split. And this is just going to make a split right here. And now I can do different things. I can come to my time shift tool, and now I can move those clips apart if I wanted to keep those. I'm going to come back up and do one more thing. I'm going to say Split New, and that is going to cut that, but it's going to drop my selection onto a new track. So that can also sometimes be pretty handy. I'm going to use Control Z one more time, and I'm going to come back and just use my delete key and get rid of that initial cough. I notice I need to come back up to my selection tool. I notice here's where my audio ends. Stay tuned. Right? And then I have cut. Okay, so right after here is where I want to get rid of that other footage. So I'm just going to click and drag there and use my delete or backspace key. And so now I've just trimmed those ends off, and we're already looking a lot better. So let's give this another listen. Hi, and welcome to the 27th episode of Goucher Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Baker. This week, we have topics ranging from creative coding, 3D animation, video editing, and audio recording. Stay tuned. Okay, so looking a lot better. You notice we still have some background noise. So anytime you're in a room with air conditioning or a fan, you might be outside with wind or have some electrical noise. You can see a visual representation of that here in the middle, where it's not a perfectly flat line indicating silence. We have some noise here still. So a very popular thing, or a very common thing that you might want to do, and what we want to do here, is get rid of some of this background noise. Also, a note about the selection tool, I'm going to click and drag and make a selection here, and this is also handy for playback. So now I'm going to hit my space bar, and it's only going to play that part I selected. So if you really need to analyze a segment, that's a super handy way to just keep playing that same segment over and over. And Baker. Okay. So what I want to do, I'm going to use this effects menu, and I have a few more effects. I downloaded some extra plugins, but I'm going to come here to noise reduction. I'm not going to click it yet. What I need to do first is come in here and select some of this white noise that I want to get rid of. Okay, so that's a pretty good sample. I'm going to zoom back in a little bit and select this whole middle clip. So now I'm going to come up into Effect and into Noise Reduction right here. And so it says step 1, you need to select a few seconds of noise and get a noise profile. And step 2 is actually the noise reduction. So step 1, I already selected my clip here, so I'm going to click Get Noise Profile. It's going to close that window, but it captured that. I'm going to come back up to Effect and click Noise Reduction again. And so now we have a few options here. I can now preview what this might sound like. So pretty quiet, nothing. I can also, if I click on residue, I hear the opposite. I hear what it's actually taking out. Okay, so we're seeing that it's taking out some of that white noise. Feel free to play with these sliders. They can be handy depending on what type of white noise you're dealing with. If you drag this to the right or to the left here. I'm going to leave that on 3 and leave this on reduce. I'm going to go ahead and click, actually, I'm sorry, I overlooked one important step. Select all of the audio you want filtered and choose how much noise you want filtered out. So now I need to actually exit out of this window, and I need to come back and zoom out, and I need to select this whole clip. I'm going to select that whole clip and come back into Effect Noise Reduction. And now I'm ready to do this right here. So now I can actually preview. Hi, and welcome to the 27th episode of Goucher Tech Podcast. Okay, so now we can actually hear what that's doing and how that's reducing it. So now I'm going to click residue and see what it's taking out. Okay, so now you can really hear that that is taking out some of that white noise. That residue playback at the there that we just did was what we're taking out. So I'm going to leave this on reduce, leave this on 3. I'm going to click OK. You notice right here in the middle, this gets a lot flatter. And so I'm going to come back here and play this. Nothing, silence, great. So I'm going to come back and play this. Hi, and welcome to the 27th episode of Goucher Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Baker. This week, we have topics ranging from creative coding, 3D animation, video editing, and audio recording. Stay tuned. All right, great. Much better shape. A few things to keep an eye on. Up here we have an audio meter, and I notice that as I'm playing, we're actually peaking a little bit, meaning that we're going past 0 and we're clipping some of our data, and that's represented by this red color right here. 7th episode of Goucher Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Baker. So I actually want to just drop that down a little bit. An easy way to do that, we have a slider right here that's a plus and minus, is just the volume for the whole clip. And so I just want to take that down a little bit. I'm going to say 3 decibels. 27th episode of Goucher Tech Podcast. That's a lot better. Personally, I prefer my audio to be peaking around -6 to -3 decibels. We don't want to get too close to that 0 mark. It can sound a little wonky. Okay, so we've cleaned up the audio a little bit, and now we need to start making some new cuts. So I actually want to cut here. This week, we have topics ranging from host Jonathan Baker into a new segment. Okay, so I'm going to choose right here, and again, I can do a couple things. I'm going to drop my playhead and come up to edit, clip boundaries, and split, and now I have these 2 tracks. If I come back to my time shift tool up here, I can now drag these clips around. The other thing I can do, I'm going to come back and use Control Z and come back up to my selection. I'm going to come in and say edit, clip boundaries. Oh, I'm sorry, I need to select this whole clip. So I'm actually going to select this whole end half. I'm going to say edit, clip boundaries, split new. So now that we have this on a new track. So now it's going to play the same, but we have these on 2 separate tracks. Okay, so now let's give this a listen with our background music. Hi, and welcome to the 27th episode of Goucher Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Baker. This week, we have topics ranging from creative coding, 3D animation, video editing, and audio recording. Okay, so that doesn't sound bad, but you notice the audio or the music is definitely too loud in some places. So we want to lower that while keeping that background music still doing its job. So there's a few ways that we can do that. First of all, again, I have this volume slider here, and I could just make the whole clip quieter. Okay, and welcome to the 27th episode. Right there, it's barely visible or barely audible. I'm going to come back up and bring this back to 0 here. I want to talk about 2 really interesting ways to get this down to a more manageable level. The first I want to talk about is our envelope tool. So we've talked about the selection tool and the time shift tool. But the third tool I want to talk about right here is the envelope tool. So I'm going to click on that. And you notice that that changes. I'm going to come back and forth a little bit. We get these gray horizontal lines around our audio waves, and we get these blue lines up top. And so I'm going to click on this blue line right at the very beginning. And you notice we get a little point there. And if I drag that down, you can see what it's doing to the clip. It's making it quieter. If I drag that up, it's bringing it back to the normal state. So I'm going to bring that to the beginning. So now actually we can see here I have a pause here and here where I actually want this to be louder, but during the times I'm talking I need it to be quieter. So I'm actually going to make a couple more control points here, or keyframes. So here we can see that the audio ends there and begins here. So I'm going to come up here again and make some control points there. Same with this side over here for this break here. And at the end as well. Okay, great. So now I can start adjusting this separately. So I actually want this beginning part to be quieter. And I want this middle part, I actually need to add one more control point here, right there. I want this middle part to stay louder, so the points at which I'm talking are gonna be, I'm gonna add one more here as well. So that the points at which I'm talking are gonna be a lot quieter. So I'm gonna do this here as well, add one more control point over here. And here. And now let's give this a listen. I'm sorry. Okay. Hi, and welcome to the 27th episode of Goucher Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Baker. This week, we have topics ranging from creative coding, 3D animation, video editing, and audio recording. Stay tuned. Okay, so that's looking a lot better. This technique is called ducking. The audio is ducking under the dialogue when needed. So there's a few other ways to do this. I'm actually going to Control Z out of all of those actions. Okay, so I want to show you another way to start ducking the audio underneath the dialogue. And to do this, I'm going to need these two on the same track. So I'm going to come back up to my time shift tool. And so far we've dragged these clips left and right, but I can also, by just dragging up, drag this up into that upper clip right there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that this first clip is selected by clicking on that there and make sure that that is highlighted. And I'm going to come up to Effect and Auto Duck. So we have some options here for the attack and decay, how fast we want this to fall off and start up. I'm going to leave this at about a 0.5. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And so now you notice this audio wave has changed and it's gotten a lot quieter in the speaking parts and louder in the quiet parts. So let's give this a new listen. Hi, and welcome to the 27th episode of Goucher Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Baker. This week, we have topics ranging from creative coding, 3D animation, video editing, and audio recording. Stay tuned. All right, we're looking in pretty good shape there. Okay, so now we've edited the beginning and end of our clip out. We've gotten rid of background audio, and we've adjusted the background music as well to fall behind the dialogue. I'm going to zoom back out here, and I'm going to come back up to my selection tool. I'm going to come right here to the end of this clip, and I'm going to select right here. If I hover over, it's going to highlight yellow, so I'm going to start right there. And I'm actually going to come a little further out. I want this to end a little further. So I'm going to select here and all the way out to the end and get rid of all of that. I'm going to zoom back in a little bit. And now we should be ready to export our final audio out into the world. So let's take a look at that. To export, I'm going to come up to File, Export, and we have a few options here. I'm going to go ahead and click on Wave. It's an uncompressed format, and if you're editing audio to be used in a video later, that's going to be your best option. You can choose MP3 if you'd like. And we get a choice for where to save it and what to name it. So I'm going to come back out to my desktop, and I'm going to name it something new. So okay, I'm going to keep this at 16-bit, and I'm going to go ahead and say save. And it's giving me a warning that since I had more than 2 channels, my tracks will be mixed down into 2 stereo channels, and that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I can enter metadata if I want, so things like artist name, track title. If you're worried about people stealing your things at all, this is not a bad way to try and input some data to get rid of that. So I went ahead and clicked OK. I'm going to come back out into my File Explorer, And we now have this Audacity podcast example. I'm going to go ahead and open that. Hi, and welcome to the 27th episode of Goucher Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Baker. This week, we have topics ranging from creative coding, 3D animation, video editing, and audio recording. Stay tuned. Okay, so that sounds really good. A few other things to keep in mind. The effect menu has a lot of great options, and you can download even more. More than I can go into here, from fades and EQ, filters, limiters, low pass, high pass filters. We have a lot of options here. Feel free to, play around, experiment with a lot of these. Things that can come in handy: fade in, fade out, some bass and treble pitches. You can change the pitch of voice and speed of things that are happening, reverb. Also, something to keep in mind here under edit preferences, or on a Mac would be Audacity preferences. We have some options here for if we come to recording. If we actually come to quality, sample rate, and bit depth. Generally, CDs are encoded with a 44,100 hertz or 44.1 kilohertz. Sample rate and audio that accompanies video is traditionally a 48,000 hertz sample rate. Sample rate is basically how many snapshots per X amount of time the software takes a look at the audio. So generally speaking, the higher number, the better. But really, I don't think you need to go above 48 here. There are very few people that can actually tell a difference between 48 and 96. These other numbers are a bit astronomical. So unless you're making something for a real audio file, you really need to stick with just 44 and 41. I'm going to leave mine right here at 41. Your bit depth. We have 16-bit, 24-bit, and 32-bit. Those things control the dynamic range for your audio, so the amount of highs and lows that can be captured. So a lower number like 16 can capture slightly less than something higher like 24 or 32-bit. We really don't need to get into the weeds here, but you should just be aware that these options exist. Default settings I usually keep mine on are this 44.1 or 48,000. And this 32-bit float right there. Okay, thank you for joining me for this web tutorial of Audacity 2.2.2. I hope you had a good time. See you next time.